Hey everyone, welcome back to 996 The Howl. In about a month, the Utah NHL team will be at the draft table in Las Vegas in the Sphere. Pretty unique arena and environment to hold a draft. Not sure how that's going to go. Bill Armstrong and Utah hold the 6th overall draft pick in this upcoming draft. In this video, we'll showcase who the player they might draft might be. Full disclosure, I do not watch junior hockey. I've never seen a second of any of these players playing hockey. I'm not going to talk, with authority on who these players are. My job is to just read a bunch of stuff. I spent about an hour on each of these prospects, synthesize aggregate information, and put it into bullet points so that when Utah drafts one of these players, sort of already what you got. With the Cooley draft, I got that pretty good. I had a sense they'd go for Cooley. Last draft, totally missed the mark. Not even myself. No one really had Simishev as number 6 in that draft, and he was off the board. So they may choose someone that's not even on this board. But I got 4 defensemen, 1 centerman. Pretty sure Bill Armstrong and company are going to draft a defenseman. They're missing that sort of number 1 defenseman, but at the same time, you can make arguments they're missing a high-end center. Some people might say Cooley is not that guy. He's like a second-line center. It's still young. He's still young. He's still raw. You never know what type of centerman he's going to flourish into, but even if he eclipses as just an average number 1 centerman, this team's looking like a team that's going to be, a deep center depth team where you have 4 or 5 centermen, you play as a committee, and you don't really have that high-end number 1 centerman, which is fine still. And then on the back end, you have a committee of defensemen as well. Looking for a number 1 defenseman at 6 overall, like a power play 1 specialist, it's hard. Even a number 1 centerman at number 6 is hard as well. Those picks, those types of players are usually in the first 3 spots. And then from there, you're looking at, a number 2 centerman, number 1 centerman on average, a number 2 defenseman. But maybe, you never know. It's a darts on a dartboard, and the whole game is to have as many darts as possible to see which one hits the bullseye. That's a pretty big preamble there. So let's get into the players. Number 1, I got Sam Dickinson in the Ontario Hockey League. Bill Armstrong and company rarely, if ever, draft from the Ontario Hockey League. I think the only prospect they have is Anson Thornton, the goaltender, who wasn't even drafted. They signed him as a free agent. So maybe they just don't like the Ontario Hockey League, or it's never been, it's never come up as an opportunity to draft someone from there. But for 3 drafts, not to have any prospect from this league, it's telling to me that maybe they don't like this league. So we got 2 of them here on the board. Again, Dickinson, 70 points in 68 games played, 6'3", 194 pounds. If a player is over 6 feet tall, Bill Armstrong has his eyes on them. He's pretty much a strong defender. He's got a strong 2-way game, high compete level, imposes his will physically, which Bill Armstrong loves. He loves players that play with that physical edge. He's got a very high defensive IQ. He's really good at gap control, likes to break up plays as players enter the zone. The only downsides to him, he's not dynamic. He's not a huge playmaker from the back end, and his offense leaves a lot to be desired. But even though the offense isn't flashy, some scouts say that there's stuff there that he might progress and grow into an offensive defenseman, and because his defensive game is so strong, maybe he could start to focus on the offensive side of the game. So people say he's got a projectable offensive skill and talent, but currently it's not there. You also got to realize these players are like 17, turning 18 years old. So they're really young, and just because they've got some negatives, they could progress and work on those negatives to turn them into positives. Scouts also say he's got smooth skating. He's got a great passing ability. He's safe offensively, but efficient. He's not flashy. And his shot is pretty powerful, and it's an accurate shot. Like I said, translatable skill, a sort of low risk type pick, but a high reward if he grows into those projectable traits. He's 4th in defenseman in points in the Ontario Hockey League. He's deployed in all situations, penalty kill, power play, but not that true number 1 power play quarterback. In the playoffs, he had 4 goals, 13 points in 18 games played. I liked Dickinson. He was a first sort of draft pick I researched and really fell in love with. It's always the first one, and then you got to go to the next player, the next player. But for Dickinson, you're looking at a really good defensive type defenseman who has some instincts of being offensive, but he needs to work on it, and scouts say it could translate into the NHL. Next, we have Zane Parekh, 33 goals, 96 points in 66 games played in the Ontario Hockey League. 6 foot tall, 181 pounds. Pretty sure that 6 foot tall is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. I know they like to smudge that extra inch. I wonder if that's illegal or not, but just funny, even with Bouillon also listed at 6.0. Back to Parekh, pure offensive defenseman. This is your power play number 1 quarterback, offensive specialist, who Utah doesn't have. So I could see them going after this type of player just based on the fact that they don't have this type of defenseman in their pipeline. Just a true offensive Cale Makar, Adam Fox, Quinn Hughes-like player. But honestly, he doesn't just read to me as a Bill Armstrong type player. Power play number 1 quarterback. He has high confidence in his ability. He takes a lot of risks and he's aggressive, not in terms of being physical, just in terms of just like going after pucks and making aggressive plays, but being confident in he can execute those aggressive plays. And even if, you know, it's a mistake and he loses the battle, he's quick on his feet to, you know, fix that mistake and not cost his team that mistake. You know, some players, if they do a mistake, they lose the puck, they're kind of lazy going back after the puck. But a lot of scouts say if he loses the puck, he's very quick to fix and rectify that mistake. He doesn't engage physically. He's not a physical type player. He's a pure skilled offensive defenseman. He acts as your 4th forward. He's fast in a straight line, but not as smooth skating as Dickinson is what I've read. He's willing to skate the puck into the offensive zone, and he likes to skate the puck out of his defensive zone. He just likes to hold on to the puck, sort of that puck moving number 1 defenseman. Again, Utah doesn't really have that defenseman in their pipeline. He's really raw, so his development timeline might be a bit longer than a guy like Dickinson, who for me, 1 more year in junior, and then he's right in the American Hockey League, and then could be called up at any second because of his defensive game is so strong. But for pure offensive type players, you got to mold other areas of his game, because if you have such a risk taker who, you know, doesn't mesh well with your team chemistry, it could cause a lot of problems. So you really got to be hands-on with such a raw sort of offensive talent and really fix those other areas of their game. You know what I think they say, you can teach, what do they say? Do they say you can teach goal scoring but not defense? I'm not sure what this saying is, but I just know that teaching defense is harder. For offense, you know, maybe a little bit easier than teaching offense than defense. That could be completely wrong. So I'm going to move on from saying that. He's not a tough minutes defender. He's not going to be that guy you play 5 minutes left in the 3rd period, or maybe the last face-off 1 minute left in the 3rd period if it's in your defensive zone. He has the OHL record for most D goals for an under 17-year-old. And also he had 2 goals, 11 points, in 13 games played in the playoffs. Now, if you remember Dickinson, I said he had 4 goals, 13 points in 18 games played. Parekh, who's the offensive D-man, had 2 goals, 11 points in 13 games. So you see, the playoffs are a different type of monster. You can see it right now in the NHL. Like, these games, they're not like regular season. You know, guys like Quinn Hughes, it's harder for a player like that to excel in the playoffs. I know Makar excelled in the playoffs a couple of years ago, but it's a very tough, different, you know, called type of hockey than the regular season. So to see like a safe, strong defensive defenseman have more goals than a pure offensive defenseman, he doubled his goals. You know, in the playoffs, the other team could be like, you got to shut down this number one defenseman, and then we don't have to worry about the other defenseman. Whereas for Dickinson, he flies under the radar. Maybe teams are focusing on another sort of offensive defenseman, but Dickinson, who has some sort of offensive instincts, maybe goes under the radar and is able to sneak in a couple goals because the opposition isn't focused on his offensive play. They're more focused on how to beat him on the defensive side of the puck. Next, we go to the NCAA and another defensive prospect in Booyam. 11 goals, 50 points in 42 games played in the NCAA. That's unreal. Like, it's really hard to have over a point per game in the NCAA compared to like Ontario Hockey League, Quebec Hockey League, Western Hockey League, the WHL. You see a lot of over point per game players in those leagues. In the NCAA, that's really rare. So you got to make a point for that. It's the highest point per game for a defenseman in NCAA history. That's crazy for like a 17, 18-year-old. Again, 6 foot flat, 183 pounds, so same sort of stature as Perek. This is the first time I've seen, you know, this characteristic put on a prospect, cerebral. He thinks the game a lot. He processes the game. He makes incredible plays under pressure. You know, even his passing, his elite passing skill, you know, he's able to make plays. He has a really, really high IQ on both sides of the ice. Great skating, strong two-way game. The only knocks on him is competitiveness. Doesn't play that physical type of game that Bill Armstrong loves. And his shot is pretty average. He's a really great also at exiting his own zone. He's a zone exit facilitator. Not necessarily he's always going to pass it up. He could carry it out of the zone. He could make some good stretch passes. But if you want to get the puck out of your zone, this prospect is really good at it. He also looks for the best breakout possibility. He's not a sort of chucker where he panics the moment he gets a puck in his defensive zone and just rims it around the boards. He'll take his time, process the game. He's very calm under pressure, which is a very hard skill, and you cannot teach that skill. For me as a player, I always panic when the puck's on my stick. Your body is in like constant flight or fight mode whenever I have the puck on my stick, and I'm a defenseman and I'm a chucker, huge chucker. So it's really hard to process the game at such a high level in the NCAA to calm your nerves, calm it down, choose the best breakout. So if you want that sort of defenseman, that's a great defenseman to pick. He's sort of in the middle of both of these defensemen. You got the strong defensive player in Dickinson, and then the strong offensive power play number one quarterback in Perek. And then Booyam is sort of in the middle there. He also won gold for USA in the World Junior Championship that happened in December. So he's known to play in high pressure cooker situations and tournaments where one game decides it all. So that's great to have on his resume as well. Next, we move to Silyayev in the KHL in Russia, another defenseman. I know I cringed when I saw KHL as well. You know, picking two KHL prospects high in the draft last season in Simishev and Boot. But then when I read this player's profile, everything just screams Bill Armstrong. Man, if he's available, I don't see how Bill Armstrong doesn't draft him. And, you know, you could rationalize that they shouldn't, because you shouldn't have all your eggs in one basket in the KHL. You sort of drafted the same sort of type of player in Simishev last draft, so why do you want to pick the same sort of player? But man, everything about him, I just can't see how Bill Armstrong passes him if he's on the board. And it's not necessarily you should draft for your team's need, because then you could make the mistake that if you didn't draft best player available at the moment of your pick, that could be a mistake, and the player you chose Sort of like what John Shaika did with the Coyotes picking Barrett Hayden instead of Quinn Hughes. You know, if you drafted Quinn Hughes instead of Hayden, even though you had Oliver Ekman-Larsson already and Chychrun, you could have traded Hughes for the need of your team, or just hold on to Hughes, see that he's better than Ekman-Larsson and Chychrun, and then trade one of those other guys. So you should draft for best player available, and I think this would be the best player available at number 6 if he's still on the board. 6'7", at 17 years old, 6'7", 207 pounds, 11 points in 63 games played in the KHL. If you remember me talking about the KHL in the prospects video I did recently, it's hard for rookies drafted to play in the KHL. The fact that he's not even drafted, he's 17 years old, he's playing 15 minutes a game on average in the KHL, the second, some people say the second best hockey league in the world. That's just incredible. I really don't see how Bill Armstrong skips over this guy. Everything I read is like he's a better Simishev. And I know they already have Lamoureux and Simishev as sort of these tall, lanky, long stick defensive defensemen. But man, if that's going to be your sort of team makeup or defensive makeup and your like X factor in the league, that unique, no one has it across the league. And the fact that Utah already has 2 and they can make it 3 of those sort of defensemen where you have one of them on each pairing, I mean, this is something that's never happened in the NHL, to have 3 towers of just these sort of unique, rare defensemen on your team. But yeah, he's physically dominating. He will break up plays coming into your defensive zone with good timed hits. They're not aggressive hits. He doesn't take himself out of position to make these hits. They're calculated hits. They're not like bull in a china shop type hits. He's a great two-way shutdown defender. He's got great skating, not even factoring his size. If you just ignore his size, he's got pretty above average. Sorry, I'm getting so excited. He's got above average skating ability, but then you tie that to his 6'7" frame. This guy could catch up to small statured, speedy type players, especially with that 7-foot long stick. I mean, yeah, this guy, it sounds incredible. He lacks offense. He's not power play number 1. Now we go to the negatives. And he's got a pretty average shot. But again, you pair him with an offensive defenseman that you grab in free agency, or maybe, you know, defensive prospects like Kipke becomes that offensive defenseman. Duda, maybe you pair him with Sean Dursey. Like, you got to pick this guy if he's available just because of his unique skill set. And if he turns out better than Simishev and Lamoureux, then you could trade those guys for what you need on the team. And at least you came out of that sort of 3 tower picks and picked the best tower that performed and developed into an NHL player. He loves blocking shots. He's a disciplined hitter, like I said. And his KHL contract can sort of be a negative. It expires after the 2025-2026 season. So that's 2 more seasons in Russia, which it's fine because I'm pretty sure most of these players are going to spend 2 more years in their junior leagues before jumping to the NHL. Maybe Dickinson requires only 1 because he's such a safe pick, but I'm okay with 2 more years. And then you have, you know, him, Simishev, and Boot all coming at the same time, and you just inject some cheap, already mature young talent. I mean, the KHL, it's a mature man's game. It's sort of like the NHL in terms of competitiveness. Obviously, I already said it's the number 2 competitive league in the world, but it's not junior hockey. It's like men play in that league. So again, I just don't see how Utah and Bill Armstrong pass on him if he's available. Lastly, we go to the 1 forward on this board in Caden Lindstrom, a centerman, 6'4", 216 pounds, 46 points, in only 32 games played in the Western Hockey League this season. He was injured, which may drop him lower in the draft order, but I know a lot of scouts have him going in the top 4, top 5, and I'm confident Montreal is going to pick a forward So that's why I think I put a lot more defensemen on this board. But it'd be a disservice if I didn't put a forward on this board. And I think this is the forward Bill Armstrong and the scouts would love to draft. He reminds me a lot of Connor Geekie. He's a huge frame with great offensive skill. He's got high intensity, uses his size, he's physical. He goes to the dirty areas of the ice. He always drives the net. He's always battling in the corners and the boards. He's got a heavy shot. It's not quick and accurate like a sniper, but if he gets that shot off, it's hard for goalies to sort of read the shot, and it's quick enough that the goalie can't really make a great save on it. And he's great at faceoffs, which the Utah team is really bad at faceoffs. And he's defensively reliable. So even though he has these offensive instincts, loves to go to the front of the net, he protects the puck well, uses his body to protect the puck, and just uses his body to create space for himself. It's great that scouts see his defensive game is strong as well. His downsides are that he's average in playmaking, doesn't have that high offensive IQ or sort of dynamic offensive style that he can make plays under pressure. He seems like a player who, once he gets the puck, he is going straight to the net with full force, and it's hard to get the puck off him. You got to realize too, he's playing in junior hockey in Canada, where if you grow faster than other players and you're already 6'4" at 17 years old and you're playing against people who are like 5'11", it's so easier to just outwill the opposition physically. But then when you get into the NHL, where everyone is like over 6 feet tall, that skill doesn't really translate well into the NHL. So you gotta be a bit wary about that as well. And this looks mean. I didn't know how to say it, but his IQ isn't a skill set he holds like a guy like Bouillon. He doesn't think the game well. It's more like, I already used this reference, but a bull in a china shop. He doesn't think about the game. He just gets the puck on his stick and goes in one direction and just brute forces his way to score goals and create great chances for his hockey team. With that sort of style, he may force the play at times. A more smarter player might pull up, wait for the trailer, and make a great pass for a better scoring opportunity. But a player like Lindstrom may not realize that sort of play and just force his puck and body into an area of the ice that isn't as executable as it were if he pulled up and waited and made a great passing play instead of just taking that puck to the net. So maybe sounds to me like a gritty power forward that you might see on the second line, but pretty much a really good third line power forward. So I think that's it. This is the 5 players I think Bill Armstrong and Utah are zoning in on and locking in on. I can't see them passing the Russian defenseman, but for me, if I had to pick one, I think I'd go with Dickinson, even though it's a safe pick, just to have 3 defensive pairings of reliable defensemen. It's great for the playoffs. It's great to sort of build that defensive structure and culture on the team where, you know, you got to play defense first and then rely on your forwards to create offense. And then you could grab some offensive players around the league like we did with Dursey, maybe someone on free agency like, you know, a Montour or a Shea in future years, that sort of offensive defenseman. You can bring them into the fold and then pair them with defensive-minded defensemen who let their partner go, be offensive, but they'll have their backs and really solidify and create structure on the defensive end of the team. Because I really do think Utah, they haven't found their defensive identity yet. And like I said, with Lamoureux and Simishev being those tall, lanky, long stick defensemen, that's sort of the identity they're going with. And Dickinson, he's not small either. He's 6'3", but plays that big body, tough style of hockey. If you're in the playoffs and you got to face Lamoureux, Simishev, Dickinson, or those two with Sileyev, I mean, you're focusing a lot on how to beat those guys in the defensive zone. How do we get around them? And you focus so much on the defensemen of Utah that you totally forget, like, oh, we got to worry about their forwards as well, which is a 4-line deep offensive threat, hopefully in the future. So pretty excited. You never know in these drafts. They're going to draft maybe someone off the board. They might trade their draft pick to go up in the draft. Maybe they go down if they see that no one's going after Silyayev because he's in the KHL. Last season, some teams were a bit wary on drafting Russian prospects. The Coyotes were not at all. So maybe they just love Russian prospects, and it's an opportunity because some teams aren't looking there as closely as Utah. But again, at the same time, maybe too many eggs in one basket. So that's it for me. Thank you for watching. If you like what you see, spread the word. And as always, thank you for your support.